Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Humanities, SOH. Certificate Programs. Optional. CTE-104 Teaching English, Elementary School. Block-1 Pupil and Teacher. Unit-1 The Young Learner. 1.0 Objectives. At the end of the unit you will be able to state the different ways a child learns language. Compare the language learning motivation for L1 and L2. Enumerate the qualities that characterize young learners. State the role of the teacher in a young learner's classroom. Describe the activities that are effective with young learners. State the reasons why the activities mentioned are useful for young learners. Organize classroom activities that would be conducive to learning. 1.1 Introduction. Language is the means by which children can explore their inner and outer spaces. Carré Rose, 1982, for it helps to develop concepts, relationships, and an understanding of relationships of not only people around but also objects across space and time. At the outset, as the young child is struggling to recreate the language it hears from the adults around, genetics and the environment plays a vital role in the child's acquisition of language. They need to be surrounded by language in different forms. To be able to communicate, children need a receptive audience. Thus, surrounded by a handful of caregivers who devote all their attention to the growing child, he or she eagerly launches on the language learning journey. Each new step acquired gives children control over their environment as they begin to ask for things, say no to things, express their feelings and get things done. A child who is listened to, read to and responded to begins to make connections between objects and sounds, experiences and words. Carré Rose, 1982. In an attempt to figure out the complexities of the world outside, the child makes connections and constructs the meaning of a certain utterance or behavior in a social context. These strategies of listening, observing the social context, experimenting in a similar context, forming hypotheses and conclusions can be gainfully used and reinforced at school. During the course of this unit, we shall look at how young learners learn language and what works best for them. 1 point to the child as a language learner. Entering school for the express purpose of learning is a turning point in the life of a child. During its preschool years, the child develops physical and conversational skills in unstructured circumstances, where his mistakes in language are met with gentle and affectionate suggestions, and there is no conscious attempt on the part of the child to learn. Learning happens as a part of interaction with the environment. Child already an efficient language user. We can say that a child who enters school is already an efficient language user of language, for she can successfully communicate in her mother tongue or the language of home. She can interpret, ask questions, negotiate, comment or wonder. Ashworth and Wakefield, 2005. And every new experience is something of a wonder to her. This is a great potential, which a sensitive teacher can exploit in the L2, here, English classroom. The teacher can encourage the child to share experiences of home or outside school, listen actively to what the child tells, ask questions, mirror expressions, make comments which tell the child that the teacher values her ideas and comments. This will help the learner to reflect upon what she knows, and this would lead to creative thinking. It is important to note that since the child can successfully use difficult structures in L1, it is fruitful not to restrict learners to very simple language or very simple topics. In fact, discussions can throw up a lot of new words and expressions that can be caught by the child as he tries to understand the meaning. The role of the bilingual method in this situation is great as the language of the environment can be used to aid understanding and also assist the learner to transfer knowledge and understanding of one language to the other. What the theorists say about the young learner. In order to understand the child as a learner of language, let us briefly visit a few of the great psychologists, linguists, and educationists and see what they have said on this topic. We shall read what Noam Chomsky, Jean Piaget, Vygotsky, and Brunner have said about language learning. Every human child has an innate capability of learning language. The limitations of the behaviorist view of acquisition led in the 1960s to an alternative proposal, arising out of the generative account of language, Chomsky's view. It was argued that children must be born with an innate capacity for language development. When a child is exposed to speech, certain general principles for discovering the structure of language automatically begin to operate. This capacity to learn language was labeled by Chomsky Language Acquisition Device, LAD. The child uses its LAD to make sense of the utterances heard around it and to make hypotheses about the grammar of that particular language. This knowledge is then used to produce language which, after a process of trial and error, corresponds to adult speech. Crystal, 1987. B. The child is an active learner. Jean Piaget said that the way a child functions in the world that surrounds her influences her mental development. The child is constantly negotiating problems, trying out ways to solve it, say, for example, taking the spoonful of food to her mouth. Here the child has to work out ways in which it can successfully direct the food into her mouth. This action is not imitation but is actively constructed by the child. He said that we solve problems internally by thinking them through, so thought can be derived from the action. Thus, for Piaget, action is fundamental to cognitive development. According to Piaget, development takes place in two ways. These are assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is when the child who has mastered the art of directing the spoon to its mouth is given a fork which it tries to use in a similar fashion for the purpose of eating. But later the child learns that the fork offers new possibilities of picking the food up, i.e., by spiking it. This is accommodation, when the child adjusts its knowledge. Both these are adaptive processes of behavior, but they become processes of thinking. Accommodation is an important idea which involves restructuring and reorganization of the mental representation of language. M.C. Laughlin, 1992. Piaget believed that the child's thinking moves through a gradual growth of knowledge and intellectual skills towards a formal and logical thinking. But he believed that growth is punctuated with certain fundamental changes a child goes through. These are the stages of development, and the child is capable of some types of thinking and incapable of others at a particular stage of its development. Piaget's 4 stages. Piaget's stages are age-specific and marked by important characteristics of thought processes. They also include goals children should achieve as they move through a given stage. Look at the screen. Piaget's theory has been criticized on 2 accounts. 1. He totally ignored the role played by language in mental development, since we need language even to think. And 2. He neglected social interaction, which is an important dimension of children's lives. According to him, the process of sense-making or meaning-making is a purely individual activity. We can still take some of the principles of Piaget's theory, which considers the world as offering opportunities for learning. We can make use of the environment to provide a setting for development as it offers opportunities to the child. This means that we must allow the child to do problem solving by working with objects and ideas and enable her to make connections of her own. See the child as a social being. Vygotsky, 1978, believed that the child is an active learner and a thinker. The child's individual efforts towards learning cannot be ignored, but it is important to see this development as happening in the company of interacting adults. According to Vygotsky, language is a tool for learning and development. Language provides the child with a tool and opens up new opportunities for things, organizing information through words and symbols. A young child, while organizing herself, speaks a lot to herself, which can be called private speech. As children grow older, they speak less aloud, but their inner speech continues, which regulates and controls behavior. Adults also speak aloud when faced with a tricky task, and we all know that all of us have an inner speech which regulates our external speech and behavior. The child is an active learner in a world full of other people who play an important role in helping children to learn. They bring objects and ideas to their attention. Adults talk to children while playing, they ask questions, read stories, or simply give a running commentary while doing things together in daily life. For e.g., let us see which book we shall read. Shall we read Ugly Duckling? Now, where is Ugly Duckling? There, in the corner. That book with a baby duck on it. Let's take the book to the bed. Do you want to hold the book? Here, hold it. Like this. Good, Alia is holding her book Ugly Duckling. In this way, adults mediate the world for the children. All along there are words repeated of the objects in a situation which the child makes sense of and adds to her repertoire. Vygotsky said that the ability to learn through instruction and mediation is characteristic of human intelligence. Children can understand much more with the help of adults than they would have done by themselves. This kind of guided and assisted learning was termed as zone of proximal development, where new actions are performed by children with assistance from an adult. Thus, according to him, intelligence can be better measured by what a child can do with skilled help. He even implied that children learn to think with the help of adults. Gradually, children shift from reliance on others to independent action. And they shift from private speech to inner speech when they shift from thinking aloud to thinking inside their heads. It is at this time they have internalized that particular bit of language. The implications for our L2 classroom would be the following: greater interaction with the children, learning words as labels for new objects, teaching them to think that the new language too is a set of words, scaffolding by the teacher to ensure successful completion of the task. Provide tasks so that the new language becomes a part of the child's language. D. Scaffolding and routines. Bruner also emphasizes the importance of the adult's role in a child's learning process. He also focuses on the importance of language in a child's cognitive development. According to Bruner, an adult uses scaffolding to guide the child's learning through fine-tuned talk. Cameron, 2001. Fine-tuned talk is something we read earlier, in which the adult talks about actions, objects, feelings, etc. about a situation as they go through the process or the activity. Adults scaffold by creating an interest in the activity, breaking the task into small doable steps, pointing out the important parts of it, reminding them of the objectives of the task, and by controlling the frustration of the child by showing, helping and guiding. We shall be reading about scaffolding in another section of the unit. 1.3 Early Literacy and Motivation in Learning L2. Early literacy. Emergent and early literacy are terms widely used in current educational literature. Let us look briefly at emergent literacy. You will be reading more about it in the next unit. Emergent literacy sums up the linguistic, numerical, and print awareness that a child develops when exposed to a stimulated environment in her preschool years. A child who is talked to, listened to, involved in play of language or otherwise, read to, sung to, and provided trips and excursions, develops language and a better communication. This is the precursor to her motivation and ability in reading and writing, which will determine her performance in later years. Early literacy is when a child gradually becomes aware of the significance of written language in her environment. The child develops the understanding that objects or things, oral words, sounds, written words, letters, and symbols are interchangeable and may mean the same thing. An early awareness of writing is considered an integral part of children's early language development. It was earlier believed that letter recognition was a precursor to the skills of reading, decoding, and writing, decoding. This is not considered true anymore as a child learns to recognize symbols and words without any knowledge of letters of the language by making use of non-linguistic clues like objects, situations, time, relationships, purpose or location. This is the comprehensible input that Krashen was talking about. The child notices written text in the environment and realizes that if one were to negotiate one's environment, one must know how to write. She attempts to scribble in her own way, trying to develop the ability to write, a skill she would need in order to become a member of the adult world. Early literacy becomes significant in the Indian context since we find a coexistence of two or more languages in the environment. Names, boards, signages, instructions, labels, directions, warnings, etc., are all present in the bilingual form in our surroundings. This means that if a child uses non-linguistic clues and cues to understand the symbols or text in a language, this would hold good for both the languages in the environment. Similarly, the languages coexist even in the verbal use, and the child gets to hear many words in L2 and internalize the sounds without realizing that certain words are not a part of her own language. This kind of familiarity would facilitate the learning of the new language, many words of which are familiar to the child. The naming game. As the child starts school, a naming game in L2 begins. The child is given names of things, people, places, rooms, and experiences which she must use appropriately as she recognizes or identifies things. This introduction to naming is dramatic and exaggerated, and the child is overwhelmed by the profusion of new terms she must come to terms with. Often, the overemphasis on naming in the school tends to create anxiety in the child. Teachers should, instead, kindle their curiosity about the interesting things in the new surroundings without the stress of repeating everything correctly. A sensitive teacher can make the process of naming comfortable to the child by bringing understanding and order to the vast array of unfamiliar objects. Thus, we can see that understanding by making connections and constructing meaning and not memorizing is the key to the development of language at school. The bilingual method can be used judiciously here to make the process more efficient, along with the mother tongue and the target language. Learning L2. We have already mentioned that the child who enters school at the age of 4 or 5 years is already an experienced language user. The development of thought and language has happened simultaneously in the home language and culture. The child also develops an intuitive understanding of the grammar of the home language, but when it comes to L2, there is a conscious attempt to isolate and understand grammar. Rules. Language learning, on the other hand, refers to the conscious knowledge of a second language, knowing the rules, being aware of them, and being able to talk about them. Stephen Krashen, 1981. Since languages have many similarities, it is easy for the child to transfer what she knows to a new context. From now on, the development of home language and L2 takes place together. By now, the child has internalized that language is made up of sounds. Language is systematic, wherein sounds, words, or sentences are ordered in a particular way. A language user can create new utterances by combining words and sounds. Language serves various functions like requesting, asking, agreeing, warning, expressing emotions, etc. There are different ways of saying the same thing in different languages or cultures. Children are often aware of this. Since with the use of language, children begin to negotiate their environment and manipulate situations, they get a feeling of power, and this motivates them to learn language. The motivation to learn the home language is greater in the nurturing atmosphere, where they are complimented and encouraged for their vocal efforts. Hence, they make continuous attempts to communicate. Since the use of home language is immediately related to their needs and comforts, the motivation to further their use of their language is immense. But in the school setup, there is an urgency to use English, and children find it difficult to understand why they need to use L2 when they can make themselves understood perfectly in L1, home language. Other impediments come in the way. At home, they learnt language as it came to them in different situations in an unstructured way, but here at school, they need to repeat and use only the particular language that the curriculum directs. We have already discussed the emphasis on naming and a quick learning of a multitude of names. At home, any effort at language use was treated with affection and encouragement, but this may not be the case at school. The teacher may be impatient with a child who takes time to learn the correct language. There may be some chiding or ridicule on the part of the teacher. The pressure to learn the new language, L2, is great, and there is less sustained comprehensible input or other non-linguistic clues. The child discovers another thing. She needs to communicate correctly using the correct form which the teacher is insistent upon. At home, the caregivers understood what the child was trying to say and responded accordingly. They did not pay attention to form all the time. The insistence to form in school inhibits her desire to communicate. The home language was learnt over the years with hardly any pressure, and any little advancement in language was met with great enthusiasm. But at school, there is the pressure of the teacher who is tied to the curriculum and the time frame. Then there is pressure of the parents who wish to find out how much of the new language she has learnt at school and are always on the lookout for demonstrable behavior in that regard. In addition to understanding the backdrop of language learning, it is important for a teacher to understand the distinguishing characteristics of young learners as well. This would enable her to create a learning environment conducive to language learning. Merely simplifying the language and the content while using general teaching methods is not enough. There are certain methods which work with young learners and young learners alone. We shall learn the characteristics of young learners in the next section. 1.4 Characteristics of Young Learners. According to Maria Jose Lobo, young learners are very receptive, curious, motivated, and spontaneous. They also are willing to participate in different activities. In addition, they are able to pick up new sounds accurately, physically active, interested in themselves and on what is here and now, deeply involved in the world of fantasy and imagination, keen on learning by doing, unable to concentrate for a long time, happy with different materials, developing their personality, highly linked to their teacher. Given below are another set of characteristics identified by Slattery and Willis. 2001. Children are developing quickly into individuals, learn in a variety of ways, are not able to understand grammatical rules and explanations about language. Try to make sense of a situation by using nonverbal clues. Talk in their mother tongue about what they understand because doing this helps them learn. Can generally imitate sounds they hear quite accurately and copy the way adults speak. Are naturally curious. Love to play and use their imagination. Are comfortable with routines and enjoy repetition. Have quite a short attention span and so need variety. Keeping these characteristics in mind, let us consider what a teacher can do to help young learners. 1.5 Opportunities to hear and use the target language. It is essential to create a learning situation similar to that of home language. This means that the learners need to be surrounded by language in its many forms. The teacher needs to talk to them a lot in English, especially about what they can see. The teacher can engage them in conversation or echo their narration of experiences, their remarks or comments in English. Since languages grow in each other's company, a teacher must not exclude home language from the classroom. Instead, the teacher must allow them to share their experiences in their home language or ask questions in their home language. The teacher can respond in English and echo their sentences in mother tongue into English. Taking a cue from preschool language experiences, a teacher can indulge in a lot of fine-tuned talk as they work together on different activities. Any attempt at using English should be encouraged and complimented. Mistakes should not be pointed out as that would inhibit the student's communication. Children should want to take part in the activities involving the new language. A teacher can create situations where the children are encouraged to construct meaning using the clues and cues of the situation, be it a story, games, films, songs, simulations, and role play. While speaking in English, the teacher should use gestures, actions, or pictures to aid understanding and the process of meaning making. Most importantly, learning English has to be made enjoyable. 1.6 Storytelling and the arts. Stories and narrative songs are a wonderful way of presenting language in an interesting way. Since stories are emotionally dynamic, they become memorable. They allow the children to make sense of this world, human relationships, processes, emotions, motives, cause and effect, and many other concepts. The story is so engaging that the children are lost in the world it represents, visualizing and responding emotionally to the situations in which the characters find themselves. Critical thinking is stimulated during and after the storytelling through questions and discussions. Stories also enable learners to pick up new vocabulary, new expressions and utterances which learners do in their own ways. Songs, rhymes and chants are appealing due to their musical quality. It has been found that children enjoy choral singing as they can all pitch in without being noticed in case they are not confident of the language. Their voice merges with those of the others. In addition, the language of the songs is interesting and plays upon the sounds of the language which help the learners to obtain a better articulation. Drawing and painting. when related to language tasks, allows learners with different intelligences to express their understanding in non-linguistic ways. Similarly, miming and role-play are also ways in which children can be fruitfully engaged in language use. These activities cater to the needs and different learning styles of learners, the visual, auditory, and the kinesthetic. Total response activities, TPR, include activities wherein children need to be physically active like action songs, role play or games where they need to respond physically. This looks after their quality of being physically active. Games like Follow the Leader, Simon Says, Act It Out are examples of such games. One thing is common in all the above-mentioned activities. That is the element of fun. Children do not realize they are learning. They see it as having fun and since they are not under any stress, they learn many things in a natural way. The more English they hear, repeat and read, they begin to see the grammar behind it and learn to use words and sentences correctly, very much like the acquisition of their home language. 1.7 Imaginative play. Children should get a lot of opportunity to use their imagination, whether it is to predict the outcomes of an action or situation, or to visualize the scene they read or heard about, engage in role play assuming roles of different characters from stories or people from real life. Some educationists believe in leaving the children alone when they are indulging in creative play. This allows them to think, negotiate meanings, exchange views and ideas with others in the group. The appearance or the intervention of the teacher may inhibit them. The teacher can keep a watch out of the corner of her eye and intervene when communication seems to be breaking down or when learners are not able to start off. The teacher can make suggestions or demonstrate ways to start the activity. As the learners grow older, they can be encouraged to distinguish between reality and fantasy, the possible and the impossible. They can be encouraged to read stories, comics, or reading games. In order to assist understanding, students can be asked to respond to questions, ask questions, describe, visualize, predict, draw, mime or play roles. Their creativity can be inspired with problem-solving games, creative writing and experimenting with the language, its sounds and words and creating new expressions. 1.8 Formats and routines. Bruner's example of a routine is of parents reading to their children from infancy. A routine is something that is followed at the same time each day. When the child is very young, she sits on her parent's lap or close to the parent and looks at large picture books. The child is allowed to turn the pages. The parent points to the pictures, talks about what they can see, describe the characters and the objects. The child listens and responds with nodding. As the child grows older, the parent asks tag questions. The elephant has a big nose, doesn't he? Involving the child in talking about what they can see and are reading about. The parent points out many features of the characters of the story. On later occasion, the child is asked to point out various things in the pictures. As the story is read and reread, the child gets to recognize names, words and pictures and pipes in with the parent, naming pictures and events. The key to the language development of the child is a lot of repetition by the parent, repetitive phrases and utterances in the story itself, and the use of fine-tuned language we talked about earlier. The teacher in the classroom can indulge in story reading for a small group of children while the others are busy with other games. The teacher can use the facility of slides and the projector to create a virtual picture book on the wall. The repetitive text in the story allows the child to predict what is coming during the fourth or the fifth read aloud experience. Soon the child joins in the storytelling. This allows the child to recognize words and sentences as well. A teacher may read the story and ask questions about the characters or pictures, adding bits of her own. At times, children can be allowed to complete the sentences that the teacher began. Thus, the teacher can have different times or days for different activities and vary them according to her objectives. There can be story time, rhyme time, quiz time, game time, and let's think time, or even let's draw or read time. Each routine would have a format, a pre-decided sequence of actions. Soon the children get used to the routines and begin to anticipate the activity time slots. While preparing for the activity, the teacher can do a lot of fine-tuned talk while asking children to do things, help out, ask what they want to do, and give instructions. The advantage of routines and formats is that the context becomes familiar to the learners and they begin to predict the next action or the intention. The teacher can introduce novelty to the routine, and so the new language is introduced in a familiar situation with new language adding on to old language. Even if the language becomes complex to the learners, the familiarity of the routine helps them to understand what the new language means. Here the zone of proximal development too comes into play as the support of the teacher helps the learners internalize new language. 1.9 Summary. To conclude, we can say that children who are energetic, motivated, curious but with a short attention span would benefit from different activities in the language classroom where they can experiment with the language they know and communicate without hesitation or fear. We have also learned that we need to surround the learner with the new language and present it through interesting activities and situations so that they can construct the meaning themselves and through repeated exposure begin to internalize the new language. Needless to say, stories, poems, songs, anecdotes, creative tasks, collaborative activities, role play, and opportunities for meaning making have immense potential in learning L2, namely English. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you.